In the last episode, we explored what perfectionism really is. Today, we go deeper. Not all perfectionism looks the same. In fact, researchers have identified three main dimensions. 1. Self-oriented perfectionism. 2. Other-oriented perfectionism. 3. Socially prescribed perfectionism. Let's look at each one. Self-oriented perfectionism. You set impossible standards for yourself. You're your own harshest critic. This type can sometimes drive success, but when that inner voice turns harsh and punishing, it's strongly linked to depression and burnout. Other-oriented perfectionism. You expect the people around you to be flawless. Your partner, your team, your family. This is the type that destroys relationships. You're not just hard on yourself, you're hard on everyone. Socially prescribed perfectionism. This one is the most complex and the most dangerous. Here, the person believes that others, parents, bosses, audiences, society expect them to be flawless, and that their worth hinges on living up to that expectation. And here's the key point. This external expectation is often internalized. Meaning, even when nobody is actually demanding that standard from us, we carry that imaginary judgment inside our own heads, as if we're being watched by an invisible observer. That's why this type has shown the strongest link to anxiety disorders, clinical depression, and even suicidal thoughts. And in today's social media culture, especially among younger generations, this type has been amplified dramatically. Researchers also distinguish between two more types, adaptive perfectionism and maladaptive perfectionism, which have one important difference. Adaptive perfectionism means striving for a high standard while still being kind to ourselves, and accepting failure, and not tying our self-worth to the result. Maladaptive perfectionism involves that same striving, but with a constant fear of failure, and our sense of worth completely tied to the outcome. The first can be a strength. The second silently consumes lives. The difference isn't in the standard. It's in our relationship with ourselves when we fall short. Honestly, I have the self-oriented and the socially prescribed types of perfectionism. The self-oriented type shows up when I've edited a video multiple times and still don't feel satisfied. The socially prescribed one kicks in when I imagine a stranger judging me. And right there, I freeze. I think caring too much about what other people think is rooted in this socially prescribed perfectionism. Recognizing which type was active at any given moment was a real turning point for me. The honest answer from clinical psychology is that perfectionism is rarely actually about success. Almost always, it's a coping mechanism that took shape in the earliest years of life. And it has three main roots. The first root is conditional love in childhood. Research on shame shows that perfectionism is essentially a 20-ton shield we carry to protect ourselves from judgment. Somewhere along the way, many of us learned that we were lovable when we performed well, and when we didn't, we were a disappointment. So perfection became the price of belonging. Alain de Botton says, perfectionism is rooted in self-hatred, sparked by memories of being disapproved of or neglected by those who should have warmly esteemed us in childhood. The second root is the gap between imagination and reality. This part really changed how I see things. Humans love the pain-free version of growth, like someone who buys a set of dumbbells and expects the muscles to appear out of sheer respect for the purchase. De Botton says perfectionism grows in the fertile gap between our noble visions and our mediocre reality. We can easily picture an ideal version of what we want: the perfect novel, the perfect career, the perfect marriage. But building any of them is extraordinarily hard. The problem isn't that we're ambitious. The problem is that we underestimate how hard the path really is. And the moment we try to begin, that gap is so wide the brain processes it as a threat. This is a survival mechanism. When the brain sees a huge gap between where we are and where we want to be, the amygdala, the region responsible for threat detection, fires up, and the system shifts into fight, flight, or freeze mode. At the same time, activity in the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and starting things, gets suppressed. In practice, we either don't start at all, that's procrastination, the flight response, or we abandon the task halfway through. That's the freeze response. This doesn't mean we're lazy or unmotivated. Actually, when the process isn't going well, because we've underestimated how hard it is, the perfectionist reads this as proof of their own inadequacy, rather than seeing it as a natural part of the work itself. The brain isn't wrong to be afraid. It simply hasn't been given an honest budget for the path ahead, so it slips into survival mode, trying to protect us from a threat that isn't real. The third root is cultural pressure. We live in a world where everything is an edited, curated version. We see other people's polished final products and compare them to our messy first drafts. You've probably heard the saying, don't compare other people's highlight reel to your behind the scenes. Research shows that this culture, generation by generation, is making perfectionism worse. And what it means is, the current culture really isn't on your side. When I finally understood that my perfectionism wasn't a high standard, but an old shield against the fear of not being enough, its power started to fade. You can't fight a problem you've misdiagnosed. So now we know what we're actually dealing with. Next time, I'm going to share the things I honestly wish someone had told me sooner, what you can actually do about it. See you in the next one.